Hello, everyone. Hopefully, you can all see and hear me. Let me just double check. I've got my recording happening. Yep, that looks like that's happening. If someone could just do a thumbs up to make sure that we're live and you can hear, that'd be great. Okay. Right, we're right on time, so I'm going to get started. There's always people that start joining as as I get started, but we'll start with the housekeeping. So just general housekeeping. I am recording this session, so you may have got a little pop-up at the top just saying that it is being recorded. And what we'll do is we'll share it hopefully by the end of the week, if not early next week, but usually we get it out on the same week. So we'll edit the video and check it up onto YouTube and then share it out. But just a quick note on that is if you have unsubscribed from our newsletter, you won't get it because we send it out via our email campaign tools. So if you've unsubscribed, you won't be getting that. So just bear that in mind. If you want to resubscribe, you have to let me know if you don't get the recordings. But yeah, just someone commented last month who was like, I didn't get it, but you will get it if you've subscribed. Otherwise, you get blocked. You don't receive our comms through marketing. But the other thing is we have Q&A across the top. I'm not sure where it is, somewhere along here. You'll see Q&A. So feel free to ask any questions. And during this, I'll try and answer them as we go. If I see them pop up, I'll try and answer them. Otherwise, I'll jump in at the end and have a look at those. Obviously, this is an open forum, lots of our customers and people on this call. So if you have a very specific and personal problem when it comes to Microsoft lists, then maybe we jump on a call separately after that rather than publicly talking about it. But if you just got a general question, more than happy to jump in and answer those. I think that's it for housekeeping. So I'm going to get started. Hopefully everybody is in who's going to be joining. So that's good to see. Right, okay, so this is an introduction to Microsoft Lists, and Lists is one of those products that I really enjoy using. It's got huge potential if you could think through a little bit creative about your business processes and how those can work for you. So the first question is, oh, hang on, my clicker's not working. Literally just tested it a second ago, but now it's not working. Okay, let's go back to my mouse. Right. What is SharePoint or Microsoft Lists? So a Microsoft List is a flexible and customizable table within Microsoft 365 that helps you track and organize data. So most of the time, we actually see people, when they want to create tables and they want to track data, they tend to lean towards Excel spreadsheets. But this really is like a more powerful Excel spreadsheet. So I try and encourage you not to be tracking data inside of Excel and maybe try and start to use Microsoft Lists as some of those opportunities. But it's kind of like repeatable sections. So you've got your columns and you've got rows. So you have a table that then becomes a data source. So it allows you to create and share your lists and then handle kind of permissions of who can edit and who can see those lists. But you can use them for a whole array of reasons, right? So you've got different types of data. So you can have like simple to-do lists, you can have like onboarding checklists, you can have issue trackers, you can have like social media posting content as a list. There's a whole scenario deck that you could use, and we're going to touch on some of those again in a minute. The other thing just to bear in mind that lists are not a database, but they are a very good data source. So once you start collecting information into a table, you can then use it in other applications. You can start syncing that to build reports and things like that. But it is not a database because a database typically is a relationship between tables and you can map out. But for general business use cases, it is a really good data source. So I would encourage you to use it, but just be careful with the phrasing that it's not a database, and you'll get some people shouting at you for using the word database. So it's not, it's a data source and it's just a table. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Right, so Microsoft always like to complicate things, but there used to be a product called SharePoint Lists, and then they created Microsoft Lists. There used to be a slight difference between the two, but they've kind of like overlapped them now, so they're essentially the same thing. The only thing I would just say is it's just that purpose. And we talk about this. If you've gone through kind of a workshop with us around your SharePoint, you'll understand that we talk about SharePoint as being company shares. And then you have teams, which is like siloed information for a department or a team within your company. And then you have OneDrive, which is your personal productivity. So list is exactly the same. So you can have a SharePoint list that's shared to whoever has access to the SharePoint site. You can have a list that lives inside of Teams, and then that's limited to the people that are members of the teams. I can create my list that sits in my OneDrive, and that sits in a product called Microsoft Lists. So there's a slight difference between SharePoint Lists and Microsoft Lists, but essentially they're the same thing. The actual engine behind them is the same. But just like you could put a document in a SharePoint library, I could put it into the Teams files, and I could also put it into my OneDrive. So you just got to think about it in that same hierarchy. But just on that note, then what we need to be careful of is just making sure that really, if you're building business data and business critical information, then it shouldn't really be in my lists. So that shouldn't be a personal list to me, because if I leave the organization, then that list will stop working. And we see it far too often that a list started off as I'm just going to start capturing some information that I'm going to use for myself and my role. But then it kind of evolves and becomes like a business critical list. And now it's a data structure that is yeah, like I said, business critical. And then when the user then leaves the company, the list goes, so does all the data and stuff like that. So you just got to be really careful. I would always encourage you to try and put the lists either in Teams or into SharePoint, wherever you think is appropriate, unless it is actually just a temporary list. Like, what are we having for lunch on Friday? You know, after Friday's gone, nobody cares about the data anymore. So just think about that. So how you think that relationship would work for you, but just have to bear that in mind. Right. When we build lists, there's kind of two factors to really think about. So is the list going to be user-centric? Is this something we're going to be showing users, then they're going to access and they're going to be going into the columns and the rows for themselves? Or is it just collecting data that you're going to use in another system? So when you're just collecting data, we don't care too much about the formatting and how the views and things look for other people, but we definitely do when we come to user-centric lists. We want to make sure that it looks tidy, it looks usable and functional for those users. So we've got some ideas that we're going to cover as we go through. As you create a new list, you'll see that Microsoft has already provided us with some templates. So these templates give us some good examples of things that we could use it for. So they've obviously got issue trackers. So that's kind of like support tickets and things like that. They have employee onboarding and events itineraries. And some of the other things I quite like is the work tracker, and you've got the content scheduler. Recipes, I don't know who needs recipes in their work, but I suppose some people obviously have requested that in the past. But yeah, there's a few templates in there that I think are really useful. I quite like the content scheduler when it comes to building out your, this is like your social media content, so you can actually upload documents and images, and then you can actually schedule it for a date that it's going to be posted and things like that, and you can assign resources to them. So there's some really good use cases there, but you can also create your own. So you could just start from blank and build up your own list. But I've just highlighted in the red square there that you can also build organization templates. So there's an interesting one. When you look at that employee onboarding, that would be a single list for every single employee, and you'd have a row for every employee, and they could go through and answer the questions. But actually, I think maybe a more appropriate approach would be to have a list per employee. And then you could create an organization template that's specifically asking the questions for those employees, because then you can tailor, depending on which department they are, as to which questions they're going to get, because you might have different questions per employee. So just have a think about, like, are you trying to collect all the information in one single list, or do you actually need separate lists to handle different purposes? Okay, so have a play with those. There's some really cool assets, and it actually gives you some really good ideas. So even if you started with issue tracker, just open it up, have a look, see how it behaves, and then use that as ideas to kind of progress forward. When you create a list from scratch, you're presented with this, and this is a kind of a new view actually. But you could display lists in a different 4 different ways. Oddly, they put forms in there, but we'll cover that one off shortly. But lists itself, so a standard list is just a table. So you've got your columns and your rows, and you'll see it very much like an Excel spreadsheet. Then you have the gallery view, which is the middle one. I'm just going to skip forms, but you have the gallery view. Now, this is like a card view that presents all the information in little square blocks. I guess this is similar to if you have like File Explorer, that you could change the view to show all of your documents just in rows, or you could change it to like thumbnails, and you can actually see the images and things like that as thumbnails. So it's a little bit similar to that, but we could go into a lot more complex details with what you could put into those galleries. Then you have a calendar. The minimum requirement to be able to use a calendar view is that you have at least one date. So you have to have a date field that then maps to the calendar. But if you're looking at like project management, for example, you might have two fields. So you might have a start date and an end date, and it will span across the calendar for that period. So calendar's dates based data. And then the board view for anyone who uses Planner. So a board view is where you have these buckets, these like columns. So you have to have a choice field, which is the different categories or the different statuses. And then you can move your cards between each column. So you could build yourself out a nice little board view. Now, you could actually have all those views for the same list. So you might say, well, let's have a projects list. And the projects list can be a table. So I could just look at all of my projects in a table. Or I can have projects as a gallery, as a card. So I might have what's my priority projects just as a card, which has all the information about those priority projects in there. Then I can have a projects calendar view, which has the start date and end date or the due dates displaying on a calendar. And then I might have a board view of the same project that I can move my projects across statuses. So yeah, you're not tied to just one view per list. You can create them however you want, as many views as you need. Just note that when you do that, you actually get this choice down here. So do you want to make this a public view? So there's two. So you can actually create a view that everybody can use, or you can actually create your own personal view. So this is where you can start having like an admin view versus a user's view and things like that. So that's another little thing to note there around that visibility. Okay. Now this is an example of a list. So this is the issue trackers list. And you can see in here that we've obviously got the title, and then we have a description, which is a long form text. We also have the severity, which is a choice field. So you've got critical, high, low as a choice. And then you have status, which is also a choice. But just note they have different formatting. So these ones have got icon or text, and these are just text, but they have pretty colors. Then you have the assign to. So this is actually picking people within your Microsoft environment to create the assign to column. And actually, if you hover over those, then you actually get their details and you can start a Teams chat or send them an email and things like that. So that actually becomes quite useful as well. Now, I could actually build a view that is my assigned issues. So this person here, I don't know his name, but you can see he's assigned to 2 of these issues. And so we could create a My Issues view that when you load it, it will only show the ones that I have been assigned to. So that person will see 2. This person will also see 2. And you could also create a view of issues that haven't been assigned. So that's like an actionable task for somebody who has to assign those people, which would be either the new status or you could filter by empty on the assigned. Okay, so that's a table view. So you can see columns, you can see rows. This is an example of the card view. So this is a gallery card view. So you can see we're pulling in similar information, totally different list, admittedly, but you can see that we're pulling in, this is a products list, and we're also displaying an image. So whenever we have images, it's always quite nice to have a card view, and we can add buttons and things like that into here as well. So you can actually have a buy now type system where you click the button and then that runs some kind of automation or some workflows. So that's a nice little card view, which I quite like the look of. And just note here, you can see this that's the card view icon, so you know which view it is. This is an example of a calendar view. So this is using the event itinerary list. So you'll see that we're showing the month view, but you can see that this is where the start and end date appears on the same day. And then this one is where it spans several days. So this is showing the whole month, but you can actually change that to show a week view or a day view. Day views, once you get down to that granular level, you can then include the time of the day. So you can see in here that that's actually showing 12:30, but you can't necessarily see that. But when you get to the day view, then it breaks it up into very much like your Outlook calendar. So you can see all those intervals throughout the day. So if you think about, again, like project management, you can actually have all those different views and then display them throughout your intranet to say, well, here's how we can have a schedule view of everything, and we can have the list for all of our projects. Then we've got this is our board view. So like I said, for anyone who's familiar with Planner, then we can actually just drag, you see, you've got the statuses across the top. So in development, launch, rolling out, and closed. And we can move those cards across the statuses, which automatically changes the status. Now, I guess you have to just ask the question, why would you create this instead of using Planner? Really, the reason we kind of sometimes go down this path is just Planner sometimes just doesn't quite fit the needs for the customization. Like there's a lot you could do in Planner, but sometimes you want to do a little bit more and you want to have custom fields and things like that. So this sometimes becomes the answer to that. So having that plan view. And of course, when you click that, it's going to launch and you're going to see all the details. So you can choose what you do on and don't display within those cards. Okay, so that's the views. Oh, there is one secret view as well, and that's called playlists. So if you pick the playlist template, which is back in the when you go to create and use the playlist template, so you can't actually create this yourself, but if you use the playlist and pick it, then it actually can play the videos and the content within the window of the list, which I thought was quite nice. But yeah, a little secret view there. So yeah, take a look at that one. One thing we'd like to encourage people is to use views with the user purposes in mind. So you see, you might want to display different columns for different people depending on their roles. So let's say a standard user can see column 1, 2, 3, and 4, whereas an admin user needs to see column 1, 4, 5, and 6, whereas a manager would actually come in and see column 1, 2, 6, and 7. So depending on your role, you can create different views that serve different purposes. Like I was saying earlier with that issue tracker, to have a view that is unassigned issues is just building a filter to show the ones that are unassigned, and then you can just very quickly just go through and just assign people to them. So just have a think about how you would use that. There's many ways that we can customize the formatting, and I've just put a link in here which you can have a look at, but essentially this is just some examples of list formatting. But there's basically 3 levels where you can do the formatting. So you could do the view formatting. So that's creating those cards or creating the list views or creating calendar views. You could format that in different ways, and I'll show you some examples of those. Or you could take a single column. You know, remember on that event tracker, we had the column that had I think it was the critical alert. So you had the icon and the text, and then the other column had the pretty colors. So you can actually determine column by column how they display. And you have forms. So when you create a new list item, there's a form attached, and you can change the way that that form looks. So we're going to cover forms a little bit more just in a couple of minutes, but let's just take a look at some of these formatting ideas. So you'll see that this is just a standard list. So, but it has been presented in a semi-card view. So this would be like a contacts list where we're capturing names, job titles. So imagine this is your customers list. So you just want to list all of your customers down here. You've even got their address, so we can integrate that into Google Maps and bring that in as well. And then you've got some notes. And then you can get quite smart with things like these little icons here. So you can like link to their email. So you could draft an email. You can even edit the contact, delete the contact, or share the contact with other staff members and things like that. So they actually end up, even though the data is just a simple list, a table behind it, you can actually present it in a very different way. Then we have a look at this one. So this is the card view. And you know how I said about the ability to add buttons to do things within those cards. So that's similar to that product card view that I was showing you earlier. And you see here, you've got the ability to request a sign off or edit the items. So you can actually build buttons that actually have purposes within those views. And you'll see here in this example is actually, you can actually build a hover function as well. So when you hover over an item, you can show even more information. And there's some really cool use cases for that around, imagine like shipping tracking. So if you want to create a tracking list of your shipped items, and you can say it's moved from this location to this location to this location, you could put that in the hover. So you hover over and you can see the dates that all those milestones were met and things like that. So some really cool use cases there. And then I thought this was quite a nice view. So some people want to put this inside of their intranets, but having like an FAQs. So that's a simple 2-column list, which is the question and then the answer. And then you change the view formatting to display the answer below the expanded question. So then you could take that list, put it on a page within your intranet, and then have it as a FAQ section. So some nice ideas there. Then we get to column formatting. So this is a comment count. Oh, actually, it's a very good point. Actually, I meant to show you that on the issue tracker. But you can actually comment within the list itself. So that actually now can create a bit of a conversation thread about the items. So rather than kind of setting up an email chain that's going to have that conversation, you can actually have those conversations within the list items. So let's say the issue tracker comes in and you're going to have to work with a colleague on solving the issue. You can actually have those comments within the list items itself. And so then you want to display the comment counts. So you can actually display that however you like, but this is just counting those comments. By default, the reason I put this in here is by default, it just tells you that there is a comment, but it doesn't actually tell you how many comments there are. So that's a little custom view. Then you've got things like you can add icons that represent data points. So you see this top row. So they've obviously captured 5 data points, and they're displayed as icons. And then the next row only has 2, and this has a different 2, and then that has 3, and this only has 1. So you can actually format that view to actually show different icons. So if you think about that critical that we had on the issues list, you can actually display just icons based on how critical it is. And you can actually map a bit of a pathway. So once it meets certain criteria, you could change the icons. So that's quite cool. This is that shipping one that I was telling you about. So when you hover over, you can actually show those shipping records. So that's just data. So we're collecting the dates. So we can show when something was ready to be packed. So the current status on this one is it is currently in transit, and it was set to in transit at that date and time. So you could just use that as a hover field just to give you more information. Because otherwise you end up with like 20 columns and then no one's going to scroll to the right. So you just make it a little bit more easy to present there. Okay. Another idea is you can actually start building little widgets like little charts and graphs and things like that into the rows. So imagine if you think about a project being a percentage complete, then you can actually show that as a nice little graph. Those types of things get a little bit more complicated, and we'll probably end up just putting 10% in the row. But that just highlights the next thing is you can actually start doing some calculated columns as well. So you can say, well, I know that we have 2 fields to calculate, and you can have another column that is the calculation of both. So a little bit like your Excel formulas. Right, now customizing forms. I don't have a huge amount of time today to go into forms. That could probably be a topic all in itself. But just to let you know that when you build a list, you have a default form. So you have the ability to create a new item and edit existing items using the default form. But there is now a new forms experience. So what I really like about the new forms experience is it's a little bit like Microsoft Forms, but you may know if you're using Microsoft Forms that Microsoft Forms has like an Excel backend to it, which I'm probably the worst fan of Microsoft Forms. I don't really like it, and I've probably told many of you that already. But this experience actually is quite good because it has the list connected to the backend. So you can create the form, which you can then share externally or internally within the organization. So those users can use the form to submit new items to a list, and then you can use the default form for your internal admin of the list. So then you have like an edit form that you just use internally, and you can have a published form for everybody else. So I really like that new forms experience. So I'd encourage you to have a play with that. And then the other thing is you can actually use lists in Power Apps. So you can actually build full feature rich apps using lists as the back end and build Power Apps. So the difference, in my opinion, between a form and an app is a form is one way. So you're just submitting and you're pushing data into the list. So that's the form. Whereas a Power App, you can actually have two-way traffic. So you can have, I'm going to submit information, but I'm also going to retrieve information, and you're going to get it back again. And the other thing is with apps is you can actually pull information from many sources. So you can say, well, I have a SQL database, and I also have, information through other APIs and things like that, and I have my list, and I want to pull all that together, and then we'll run that in an app. So that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, but there's definitely some use cases versus forms versus apps, but it depends on your own use case. Then what have we got next? So level up your lists. So this is once you have a list, what are the things you can do with it? So there's a thing called lookups, which if anyone knows about lookups in Excel, but it's essentially if you have 2 tables or 2 lists, you can look up one to the other. So if you imagine that products list, so these are all the products we have for sale, or here's all the products that we have in our inventory, who are the vendors of the product? You could then have a second list for the vendors. So rather than having to type the vendor into every single product, you actually just connect the 2 together. So you say, well, for that product, that's the vendor. And so then you can click from the product and find the vendor's sales rep contact details because that's in the vendor list. So that's what lookups are. And that just means you don't have to duplicate data into 2 separate places. You're just looking up the data from one list into another list. Then we could build dashboards. You may have seen it in some of those screenshots, but you could build dashboards around, either in Power BI or Excel, because like I say, it's a data source that you can leverage. And so as people are tracking things like issues and stuff like that in a list, you can now build a dashboard to report on it. the real annoyance with Microsoft Forms and Excel spreadsheets. So Microsoft Forms, the biggest problem is it's connected to an Excel spreadsheet, and you have to kind of like go into the back end and get the data back out again to then do some reports. And then having data in Excel spreadsheets, you don't have the granular controls over the edits that people can make. So we hear about it all the time. The Excel, this one spreadsheet runs the entire organization, and then someone's deleted some columns and rows, and now you've lost it forever, and you have to restore back the previous versions of the spreadsheet. But sometimes that's 10 versions ago, and that's the one you have to restore, which means there's 10 versions of things that you then have to repeat. Whereas within a list, you have like row level control of just saying, well, they can or can't edit it. And it's less likely that they're going to delete the content out. But at a row level, you have version control. So you can actually just say, someone's made a modification to that row. I'm just going to restore the previous version back just for the one row, not for the entire list. So anyway, that's why I like lists. And then the other thing is making it accessible. So embed it wherever it needs to be embedded across your SharePoint sites or your pages into Teams and things like that. So make it really accessible for people to be able to access that list. That is given if you want them to access it. If you just want them to have the form, then separate it out. Don't display the list, just give them the form. Okay? Right, just powering on. I know we're getting close to time. But then beyond that, so once you have created the list, then what can you do? So just think about your workflows. Well, like why are you even capturing the data in the first place is usually because you want to do something with it, right? So once you have the list, think about approvals. So that's routing approvals through managers, or I've put officers because you might have like a IT officer or a health and safety officer or something like that you have to route the approval through. So that is based on the trigger of something having been created or the status has changed. So you've created a new issue. So route that through an approval process or at least a notification to somebody to say a new issue has been raised. And then you can have it, well, when the status changes, you then might route the message back to the original person who submitted it. So think about those workflows. But then you can also have reminders. So you can have, well, nobody's done anything, nobody's changed the status, in which case then you want to set up reminders to say, hey, this was raised yesterday and it hasn't been dealt with. So that's another workflow that's quite common. And then the other opportunity is to integrate it into all your other systems. So you can have it that when someone creates a contact in the contact list, that it also adds them into your CRM and it adds it into marketing, MailChimps and things like that. So just think about those integration opportunities as well. And quite often, going back to that first question was, is your list data only? We actually quite often will build lists to be the center point between lots of applications. So, if a record exists in this database and a record exists in that application, how do we tie the two together? And we'll build a little list and say, well, that record equals this one, which also is the same record as this one, and we kind of join the dots. So for us, lists become super helpful in all of the workflows that we do. So I thought I'll just share some knowledge around lists, but I definitely have a play. Just bear in mind where you create your list in the first place. It needs to be SharePoint or Teams. Otherwise, just expect it to not be business critical if you're going to put it into your OneDrive or your My Lists. Okay, while I just review if there's any questions, I just want to cover up what's next. So next we've got enhance your SharePoint design skills. So this is making pretty pages. There's been some huge developments from SharePoint or from Microsoft on how to make things look nice, which has been a long time coming. So we're going to cover that off, and Gabrielle's going to jump on and run that one. So we look forward to that one. So feel free to use the QR code to register for that. The QR code below that is to follow us on LinkedIn. If you are not following us already, then jump into that, because we always try and put some tips and tricks through our LinkedIn profile. So that's the company LinkedIn, and then feel free to follow me as well if you can find me on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, that's my contact details down there, so feel free to reach out to me as well, and we could talk about maybe some of your list opportunities and see where we can help. I'm just going to jump into the Q&A, see if there's anything come through. No. That's always good. Oh, I got a chat come through. Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Really helpful information. Yep, thank you very much. Right, so sounds like I covered everything, which is always awesome. So, like I say, I'm happy to just stay on for a couple of minutes if anyone's got any questions that they want to raise. Otherwise, oh, there is a question. I see a little red light. Just give me a second. Can you publish a dashboard to a website? If we're talking about Power BI dashboards, then this is a little bit of a tricky question because yes, you can. You can make a Power BI dashboard public and then you can put that on your website. However, by doing so, you're now exposing that publicly, and therefore you have to bear in mind that there is a risk. You just have to be conscious of the data that you're putting into the dashboard, because yeah, people will start playing with it and drilling into things. So you need to make sure that it's very locked down. If you want them to log in and see the data, so let's say I want to share client dashboards and I want a client to look and only see their data, then they would have to log in as like an authenticated user. And currently, the way Microsoft does their licensing for Power BI, you would have to license all of those guest users. So it ends up becoming a not particularly cost-friendly way of doing things, which is why in most cases people end up doing Excel spreadsheets and sharing those instead. But that's kind of doesn't look great and it's a bit cumbersome to do. But yeah, Power BI, I wish they had a viewers only license. That's kind of my own wish. If I was Microsoft, I would have an editor's Power BI editor's license and then a Power BI viewers license, which would be like $1 rather than the many dollars for the editor's license. But as it currently stands, you have to give everyone a license. Okay, do we have another question? Oh, that's a thank you. Okay, thanks, David. Okay. Can you do a customized session with a team to work through onboarding? So are you saying that could you create a list as a customized list for each team as part of an onboarding? So yes, you can either template the list. So once you save it as an organization template, so you say every time we go through onboarding, this is the list that we want to use, and we're going to use that as a little checklist. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. So you might have department versions of the templates, or you can have one single list, which you then have a row for every staff member, and then they go through the onboarding steps. But you just got to be a little bit careful about the security of who can see what in those list items. But yeah, many ways to tackle that question. Or you present it as a form would be the other thing. So you only give the staff members the form, and that's the checklist that they have to go through for themselves. And you're just capturing the data in a list. Oh, sorry, Dawn, just read your message. Yes, we can jump on a call. No problems. Yeah, anytime. Okay. Right. Any other questions? Joe's manning the Q&As. Is there no questions? Okay. All right. Well, I'll just stick on for another couple of minutes just in case there's anyone who's a bit too shy to ask in front of everybody. But thanks very much. Thanks for joining us, and we'll get the recording out to you within the next day or two. Thank you. Okay, question. Can you use Copilot with lists? Well, funny enough, actually, Copilot currently doesn't read list data, but I'd imagine that that is going to be something fairly soon because ultimately a library, a SharePoint library with the documents is actually also just a list. So in the back end, there's a 100 template, which is a standard list, and a document library is a 101 template document list. But the only difference is one has documents in it. So at the moment, no, Copilot can't. Actually, that's not a straight answer. So Copilot can't read list data, but what it can do is if we build an agent, a Copilot agent, then we could use Copilot to consume the list data and then create entries on our behalf. So if you think about, I think some of you may have heard me talk about it, but if we created like a health and safety list, so all of the incidents are in a list, then I can actually get Copilot to ask questions if a staff member raised an incident and asked Copilot, let's say Copilot, they said, what's our policy around health and safety incidents? Copilot can actually respond to say, well, has there been an incident? And then it can actually start gathering the information, like who was involved in the incident, what date was it? Was it an external party? Has it been resolved? Does it need to be escalated? And things like that. Ask all those questions and then populate the list. So kind of yes, yes, and no on that one. It doesn't use lists it can't read it and then respond, but it can use it from a function if we build a Copilot agent. So hopefully that helps. Right. Sorry, a bit more chat. Okay, really good insights. Yeah, thank you very much. All right, I think that's us. If anyone's got any other questions, feel free, just book a time with me and we'll jump on and we can talk about those any list queries that you might have. In the meantime, I'll catch you next time. Thank you very much. Bye.